Hello. Welcome to the Vibrant Health Show. I'm Dr. Shannon Pearce. Today we're going to talk about all things hormone thyroid connection. Let me pull up and see if anyone has questions as you jump on. Say hi, say good morning. It is a rainy day where I am. Hopefully, you guys are having better weather than we are. All right. Hold up, ready for y'all's questions. Let's go. Okay. One of the things I love teaching people, because the fastest growing female health issue is a thyroid problem, right? Rarely do I meet a woman who doesn't have some type of thyroid dysfunction, whether you're on a medication, been told maybe you should be on a medication, maybe you just feel like a lot of your symptoms feel like thyroid, right? If you Google weight gain, constipation, my hair's thinning, all these things, it always comes up thyroid first. But the truth of the matter is, it's rarely your thyroid first. Now, that doesn't mean your thyroid hasn't been affected. We'll talk about that today. But rarely is the primary thing that starts going crazy your thyroid. In fact, your thyroid is more of a surveyor of the land, okay? Your thyroid's job is to listen to all these other things going on inside your bloodstream and to report back to the brain, where it tells it to either turn up function or turn down function. Basically, that function is metabolic activity, okay? So follow me on this. Your thyroid is in charge of either saying, hey, we need to speed up metabolic activity, right? Things are going too slow, or hey, we need to slow down metabolic activity. Things are going too fast. Now, here's where the intricacy lies. The actual problem is whatever's going too slow or too fast. The thyroid itself is just responding to that. So in just treating the thyroid and not looking into all the other things that affect it, we're really missing the mark when it comes to actually getting women well, and men too, but women just tend to be more prone to thyroid issues because of what I'm going to teach you today. There's a very intricate connection between your hormones, your adrenals, and your thyroid. And if they're not being addressed at the same time, you're very likely the person who maybe your thyroid numbers look okay, but you still don't feel good. Or you're on a thyroid medication, yet it didn't do all the wonderful, magical things you wanted it to because these other pieces of the puzzle haven't been addressed. Today, I'm going to teach you the 3 primary ways different hormones affect your thyroid, and also instruct you on ways that, or things you can ask your doctor, or things you can check for to see if those values have been evaluated, because they really make, such a difference when it comes to actually getting long-term stability in your thyroid versus maybe some temporary results, but still having all of these other issues going on. So the first thing I want you to remember is your thyroid is rarely the primary issue. If you already have a thyroid problem, if you've already had your labs for your thyroid drawn and they're out of range, to me, that's just a starting place. That doesn't mean, oh, we found your problem, it's your thyroid. To me, when I see thyroid hormones that are out of range, I'm thinking, oh, what else is going on that's creating the thyroid to feel like it either has to speed up or slow down, okay? So just that alone is not the answer, is not the cause of your problems. It's an adaptation. It's a way your body's responding to the environment. So if you've only ever just had your thyroid checked and they're treating you for a thyroid issue, but you've not investigated these other pieces, highly suggest that you add these pieces in. Or if you have and they haven't been properly addressed, definitely finding answers for that too, because there's a lot of long-term consequences that come down the road if you're not balancing the thyroid, the hormones, and your adrenals at the same time. So let's dive into number 1, the top hormone that I see that really has an effect on your thyroid function. Number 1 is cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone. It's best known as a stress hormone made from your adrenal glands. However, what we don't often realize is how many jobs your adrenal glands actually have and the true function of what cortisol does. So too much cortisol over time, yes, is going to cause stress, is going to cause anxiety, is going to cause weight gain. We don't want too much cortisol. But low cortisol or more adrenal fatigue can also cause a whole host of problems because cortisol helps regulate metabolism. So if it's too low, your metabolism goes down. Cortisol helps actually make your immune system work better. So low cortisol or high cortisol is going to have an effect on your immune system. But more than that, it has a direct effect on both production of thyroid hormone and conversion of thyroid hormone. If you go back to a video I did a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the different ways that you can have a thyroid issue. We talked about production, we talked about conversion, we talked about interference and immune system. So if you haven't watched that one, go back and familiarize yourself. But I said in that video that the primary problem I typically see when it comes to a thyroid is the conversion of hormones is off, not the primary production. And these 3 hormones we're going to talk about today are big reasons for that. So with cortisol, there's a couple of ways that this can affect specifically your thyroid numbers on labs and make it look like a thyroid problem when in fact it's actually an adrenal problem. Your thyroid's responding to the environment. Because cortisol, the first thing it can do is it slows that conversion from T4 to T3. So it can make it look like you have little or not enough hormone. But also what cortisol does when it stimulates to your brain, hey, we have a stressor, we have a problem. Now also remember that cortisol goes up anytime you have a physical or an emotional stress. So when I say the word stress, sometimes people think, oh, like something major happened or a trauma or an accident or an injury. And if you don't have that kind of stress, you think that maybe cortisol is not your problem. But cortisol also responds to physical stresses in the body. It elevates in times of inflammation, in times of infection, even just busyness, right? Just having a really packed schedule. Even if you don't necessarily feel stressed, your body and your adrenals are taking the brunt of that, overextended calendar, and cortisol can elevate for that. So the word stress can be both physical, infections, inflammation, things going on inside the body. Those are stressors. Or emotional, busyness, actual trauma. I know a lot of people do have real stress. All of those things can elevate cortisol. When cortisol is elevated in the body, the brain thinks something's wrong, right? It's like, oh, we're in trouble. Something's wrong. We have all of the stress hormone. That must mean something is going on. So what it does is brilliant. You'll hear me say this all the time. The body is brilliant. It is always doing the right thing at the right time. We just don't always like what it's doing because it's inconvenient for us, but it is always the right thing. So just to give you a recap on how thyroid hormones work, T4 is your primary thyroid hormone that's made inside of your thyroid. It then kind of circles through the body and gets converted to T3 in different areas. Liver, gut, skeletal muscle, adrenal glands. There's lots of different areas. Most areas of the body, in fact, can convert T4 to T3. T3 is our active hormone. That's the one that makes you feel good. That makes the weight come off. That makes the hair grow back. That makes the mood better. T3 is really the hormone that we want there to be a lot of. However, because T3 is that active hormone, that stimulatory hormone, it has a lot of the similar effects as cortisol. Okay, follow me on this. Therefore, if your body has too much cortisol and you're maybe getting some anxiety, maybe you're getting some heart palpitations, maybe you're getting hot flashes, anything that's really showing your body that you have that elevated stress response from cortisol, your body gets similar things from too much T3. Having too much T3 or hyperthyroid recreates very similar things, right? Heart palpitations and anxiety and sweating and feeling like that brain is racing all the time. So if the body knows, hey, we have way too much cortisol, this over time could be dangerous, right? Those stress hormones over time, we know stress is linked to heart disease, it's linked to strokes, it's linked to cancer. Your body knows that this stress hormone over time is dangerous. So it says, okay, well, she's not helping me get rid of this cortisol. How else can I protect her? Oh, I know what I can do. Let's decrease the conversion to T3 thyroid hormone to try and protect, right? The heart, the brain, the immune system, all of those other places. So here is what cortisol really does to your thyroid. It actually stops the conversion of T4 to T3 to protect you, remember. So if you just see your thyroid hormones are low and your doctor's like, hey, let's jack you up on T3, but no one fixed your cortisol, guess what? That can actually become a dangerous situation, right? Because it was never just the T3 as the problem. Are you following me on this? Like the thyroid didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm not going to work. It's doing this on purpose for a reason. Figure out the reason. Don't just treat a number. So cortisol, if it stays elevated, your body also has a protective mechanism where it can, instead of making T4 into T3, it can make T4 into reverse T3. Reverse T3 is where your body stores that extra T3 hormone for protection, so it's not causing too much elevation, too much stimulation in the system. So unless you actually fix the cortisol piece of the puzzle, the stress piece of the puzzle, which could include needing to manage infections, reduce your inflammation, have better self-care practices, do more meditation and mindfulness, all the things that will help reduce that cortisol, until you do that, the body is not going to feel safe to convert T4 to T3 to really regulate those thyroid hormones. But rarely are we told that when we're discovering we have a thyroid issue. We're just saying, hey, your thyroid hormones are low. Here's thyroid medication. Good luck. You'll be on it the rest of your life. See you later. And nobody's addressing these other sides. So cortisol is number one. If you have never had your adrenals checked, if you've never had your cortisol checked, highly recommend you do that. My favorite way to check adrenals is through urine over a 24 hours so that you can get your pattern of your adrenal function. I'll put links for that below. You can do it through blood. It's not my favorite because you're only getting a 1-point snapshot and there's lots of room for you to miss other pieces of the puzzle. But it's better than nothing, right? If you can ask your doctor to add cortisol to your next blood draw, it's at least better than nothing to kind of see where your ranges are. Or if you're able to do the deeper mapping of your adrenals, highly suggest that is the next step for you, because adrenals and thyroid are so closely connected and it's almost impossible to get real long-term balance in the thyroid if you have adrenal dysfunction or cortisol problems. So hormone number one that affects the thyroid, cortisol. Likely the most common one that I see affecting adrenal function. Number two is estrogen, right? We are women in particular in this group. We have lots of estrogen, and that means we have room for lots of different fluctuations of estrogen. The way that estrogen affects your thyroid is both your estrogen and your thyroid hormones, they actually share what's called a carrier protein. So in the beginning, I said your thyroid makes primarily T4 thyroid hormone, and then it has to travel around the body where it gets dropped off and converted into T3, which is our active hormone. Well, the way it travels around your body is on these carrier proteins. But your thyroid hormone and your estrogen share the carrier protein, which means if you have too much estrogen, if you are estrogen dominant, which is again pretty common, especially if you have things like heavy periods, fibroids, endometriosis, those bloating, those are lots of symptoms of somebody who has estrogen dominance. Well, if you have too much estrogen, just picture this. Say you have like adequate amounts of your thyroid hormone, but you have a ton of estrogen, and they're sharing this one tiny little protein. Well, estrogen's going to pile on that carrier protein, and it's not going to leave a whole lot of room for your thyroid hormone. So even though maybe you have enough thyroid hormone, maybe your thyroid's making plenty, if it can't get on that carrier protein to get to the other places in the body to convert to T3, you can still present as having a thyroid problem when, just like the first scenario, maybe it's not actually your thyroid that's making the problem. Maybe there's too much estrogen taking up all the space. So again, if they see, and that can over time actually create lower T4 or sometimes elevated T4, every body will respond to that situation differently. But typically what I'll see is if there's a lot of estrogen and your T4 can't bind on that protein, your body has a lot of extra circulating hormone, thyroid hormone, so it actually stops making more. It's like, hey, the blood's telling me I have plenty in there. I don't really need to make any more. So over time, that begins to look like hypothyroid. Again, not because the thyroid can't do it. It's protecting itself. It's saying, hey, the blood's telling me there's a lot down there. I don't need to make any more. And then over time, we get those deficiencies. But not because of the thyroid, because of the estrogen dominance. So checking your estrogen, I feel like every woman needs to check her hormones consistently every couple of years regardless, but especially if you have been diagnosed with a thyroid problem and they're not checking your estrogen, estrogen dominance could very easily be one of the reasons why you are not producing enough thyroid hormone, or it doesn't look in your blood like you have enough thyroid hormone because you're not getting them on that carrier protein. So remembering they literally share the same transportation. They are directly linked in the way they get to the cells in your body. Checking estrogen is imperative. And then the third one. So we have cortisol, we have estrogen, and then we have progesterone, which I believe is like the forgotten hormone when it comes to thyroid function. I hear a lot of people talk about cortisol. I often hear people talk about estrogen, but rarely do I hear somebody speak about the progesterone connection to estrogen. And it's direct. It's not an indirect, like they share something later on. Progesterone directly affects the production and the conversion of T4 and T3 hormone. So it's a stimulatory. Progesterone, it's why it goes up so much when we're pregnant. It's why it helps with healthy skin. Progesterone's very proliferative, right? It makes things grow. It makes more things. And it actually stimulates through, now if you have Hashimoto's, you'll be familiar with these terms. It actually stimulates your TPO enzyme, not your antibody, right? If you have Hashimoto's or autoimmune thyroid, you have a TPO antibody. But how you get the antibodies to it is there's an enzyme called TPO, thyroid peroxidase enzyme, that is the magic kind of enzyme that helps create T4 and then helps turn T4 into T3. Progesterone is the direct stimulation to that enzyme. Now, what I see more often is a lot of women are progesterone deficient. Now, here's where I'm going to tie it all back together, because for almost every person that I find who has this situation going on, you have a little bit of all three of these things. Most women have some type of cortisol imbalance because we have stressful lives and we're busy and we don't take proper care of ourselves. So that's pretty common. Estrogen dominance is becoming much more common because of environment and inflammation and toxins that we're exposed to. And progesterone deficiency, because progesterone, not only is it directly linked to making and converting your thyroid hormone, it's actually the direct precursor to cortisol. So progesterone makes cortisol, which means if you're always stressed, if you have cortisol issues, if you have adrenal issues, your body is draining your progesterone. Cortisol will reach up and steal that progesterone down in order to make more cortisol to keep you functioning, leaving you in a progesterone deficiency. So progesterone deficiency is often caused by the same stressors that cause adrenal fatigue, which is why I often see them together. Adrenal fatigue and progesterone deficiency kind of go hand in hand, and that comes from having too much cortisol over time, right? You put a ton of cortisol out, a ton of stress, you don't take care of it, you don't manage it, and then all of a sudden your body doesn't feel like it can make any more, and you end up in this progesterone and adrenal deficiency, which makes a giant impact on your thyroid. I believe those two things, the adrenal insufficiency and progesterone deficiency, are the main causes right now. You sitting there with a thyroid problem, I would just about bet one of those pieces is at play when it comes to your thyroid function. So progesterone is imperative. If your progesterone is deficient, you don't even have enough to go up and stimulate to tell your thyroid to make more hormone. You don't have enough to go up to tell it to actually convert your T4 to T3. So again, your thyroid might be working great. It's just not hearing the signal from progesterone to make more or do more or convert more. Don't blame your thyroid for all of the problems if these other areas haven't been investigated. That is truly like the moral of the story today. Thyroid doesn't act independently of the rest of the body. Your thyroid doesn't wake up one day and just decide it's done making hormone and it's just gonna, sleep on the job today. Thyroid is responding to the environment, and because they are all connected through what's called your HPA axis, that's your hypothyroid, which is your brain, right? To pituitary, to adrenal, which connects with your hormones and your thyroid. That is literally the connection, right? Your brain talks to your thyroid. Your thyroid surveys the body. It looks for the hormones from the adrenals, it looks for the hormones from your endocrine system, and then it talks back up to the brain. That cycle is running 24 hours a day. So if there's any disruption anywhere in that cycle, it can present as a thyroid problem when in fact it's not your thyroid. I feel like that's I need to a tag phrase. It's probably not your thyroid. It's probably all of these other things affecting thyroid function. So if you're someone who's frustrated, you're like, I feel like I've been on these thyroid medications, or, I don't know what's going on. I don't feel any better. I'm not getting results. I can't lose the weight. My hair's not growing back. Please do not forget the importance of proper hormone balance, good adrenal function. Then all of those click together with thyroid function, and that's where you really get the healthy, happy version of you. I call it the female trifecta, right? This is your women's health trifecta. They're the three pieces of the puzzle you have to make sure that you are looking at together, but rarely they are. So if you have not had your cortisol checked, if you've not had your estrogen and your progesterone checked recently, right, within the last 6 months to a year, highly recommend testing them again. You have tiers, right, of how you can test them. Definitely the easiest and the most affordable. You can likely ask your primary care physician to add it onto your next blood labs, and most of the time they'll say yes. Again, the blood version of this has lots of room for misinterpretation. You can miss some things, but it's at least bare minimum, right? If you need a really easy, simple, likely free way to at least get a base check, ask them to add your cortisol, your estrogen, and your progesterone to your next thyroid labs. From there, the next step up is doing a really good hormone and adrenal mapping. The Dutch test is my favorite. There's tons of videos in here about it because I love it so much. But it really maps out. It gives you a 24-hour snapshot of your patterns, of your adrenal glands, of your hormones, of your neurotransmitters, of your vitamin deficiencies. So it's a great all overview of that whole HPA axis, right? Not just one piece or another, but looking at that whole communication loop. So you get a whole lot more information and you're able to make much more specific just changes and options based on your body. When you do it that way, much prefer to test it. But again, I'm all in favor of any step you can take in the right direction. Any additional information you can get will make your decision making easier. So if you can get it through blood through your doctor, great. If you want to dive deeper and do it through the Dutch test, I'll put those links below. But regardless, I want each and every one of you to try and see if there is a way you can make sure cortisol, progesterone, and estrogen are being tested. Yes, how do you get help with your labs are normal? And I said birth control is contributing. So birth control, I have a couple of videos in here all about that too, right? It's its own animal. Birth control is going to make your estrogen and progesterone look low because it squashes it, right? It's how it keeps you from getting pregnant. It floods your body with synthetic versions of the hormones so that your body doesn't make its own. So in that circumstance, when somebody's on birth control, I much prefer to look at the things that we know are still relevant. So you can still absolutely do your adrenal mapping. You would get better results looking at a hormone mapping like the Dutch test, because even though it shows your estrogen and progesterone being low, you still get to see your pathways underneath and your metabolites, and we can see where the body is holding either inflammatory estrogens or if you have other deficiencies going on. So you still get a lot more information. Blood labs on birth control are pretty much, especially for hormones, not really very useful, but you could still check your adrenals, right? That's something that's still relevant, as well as your DHEA and your testosterone. Those would be other values if you're on birth control I would add in, because I typically see that those will start to become more dominant as well because your body's not making enough estrogen and progesterone. So just a little bit of a different situation. I would still suggest the Dutch test because you get a whole lot more information. And then if you can't do that, if you're just doing blood, really focus in on adrenal function, cortisol, DHEA. And potentially, I'm just gonna gently nudge it, potentially have a plan to maybe come off that birth control and find better ways that don't affect your hormones. So it's a whole different conversation. Estrogen dominance, progesterone extremely low. Antibodies over 900. Cortisol came back with morning. Yep. Yes. Yep. Okay. It's a process, right? She said she has all of these things. She knows it's bad, but she's still confused about how to fix it. Holistically, it's about just knocking down one thing at a time, right? So if you know, for example, antibodies over 900, we know there's an immune system issue. Something is aggravating your immune system to have stimulated that autoimmune reaction, right? So looking at all the things that you put in there, I would say the first thing I'd be investigating is there a chronic infection? Is there Epstein-Barr is the number one cause of Hashimoto's when antibodies are that high? Do you have something that's making that go up? Because a chronic infection like Epstein-Barr is also going to affect your cortisol and your adrenals. It's also going to affect your hormones. So I think the picture of all the things that you have going on, my next question is what's making your body so mad, right? Like everything's all over the place. There's clearly some triggers in there. If you haven't yet asked them to look into Epstein-Barr for you, I would absolutely do that. Looking at that, my instinct says you probably have that chronic viral load. So I think that's the bigger question for you is why are so many things off? Why is my body so mad? And then once you figure that out, then you start working on them one by one, right? There's lots of beautiful things you can do to detox estrogens. You can support your adrenal function. We can use adaptogen herbs. Like there's lots of steps you can take in the right direction. I think you're still missing your root cause with all those numbers. I think the endo would be, so there's lots of videos in here about Epstein-Barr too. Google, search it in the search tab. It's another one of my favorite topics. It is the number one cause of Hashimoto's. It has been well documented that they find the viral load inside the thyroid, which is what's stimulating the antibody production. I think your endocrinologist would likely test it for you, right? Now, when you watch back on some other Epstein-Barr videos, they're probably not going to have a whole lot of great suggestions for you because there's not a medication to fix it, but I have tons of information and just resources for that in here as well. But I think testing first and seeing if that is your root cause, I would ask them 100%. I think it's well worth the ask. Good questions today, ladies. Wonderful. All right. I'm going to hang around for a minute or two more. If you have any other questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. If you are watching this back later or you have questions, I'll come back and check comments. But remember, your thyroid doesn't work on its own. It doesn't act on its own. It is connected to all the other pieces. And most often, the thyroid is just responding to a bunch of other stuff going on. Look at the other pieces of your puzzle if you really want that to all come together, right? To click together. And then when you have a lot of things going on, I just want to touch back with Ashley for a second, because I think this is a lot of women. One step at a time, right? There's no way to fix all the things at the same time, and you really can't make a bad choice necessarily. Just start somewhere, right? Find information on one piece of your puzzle, start working on that. I have tons of resources, right? We have a whole program that we walk people through with that if you're looking for help and guidance. But even on your own, there's lots of ways you can go and find enough information on each one of those pieces of your puzzle and just start making movements in the right direction. And unfortunately, that's probably going to require you to do it for you. Rarely is your endocrinologist going to be the person who's going to really help you walk through each of those steps. They're looking for a diagnosis that they can medicate, and the buck stops there. So don't be discouraged by that. It just is what it is. Now it's kind of up to you to find some other more holistic resources to support around the care that you're getting from your medical team. And I think a lot of people are in that boat. All right. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with me. I will be back with more great content over the next few weeks. If you have more questions, let me know, and I'll come back and answer those. Have a great rest of your day.